Hey, it's Seraphin, and if you like donuts, then statistically speaking, you're not alone. Hundreds of millions of people eat donuts every year, with billions made, and there are always a ton of new flavors and variants just waiting to go viral online. But there's always something special about that delicious and classic donut. Maybe with a little twist. This is exactly that kind of homemade donut recipe. It's a yeasted donut recipe, so you know it tastes really good, and it could even be healthier for you than cake donuts with just baking soda or powder due to the yeast consuming an amino acid that leads to acrylamide formation, which has been shown to be carcinogenic in lab testing. Yikes. There's a recipe from the 1800s on the making of Dow Nuts with ingredients including flour, yeast, sugar, eggs, and nutmeg. This dough was then shaped into nuts and fried in lard, which sounds a lot like donuts. Although we're doing a lot of things differently from that recipe, the ingredients list is mostly the same. And this recipe also contains just a little hint of nutmeg, a little less than a fourth of a teaspoon of it, which gives the donuts a warm and hearty taste. The spice is optional, but we think it adds to the flavor and pairs well with the sweetness of the donuts. Now, history aside, to get the best results from this recipe, here are 5 things to pay attention to for success. The first thing to know is that this dough is soft and sticky. That's the way it's meant to be. When we fry the dough, the water evaporation is a big part of the lift and gives us super fluffy donuts. So don't add flour to the dough during kneading if it looks like this. It can look alarming, but that's the way it should be. Of course, that doesn't mean your dough should look basically liquid-like or as if it doesn't have any gluten, which brings us to our next point. You need to use a high-protein bread flour for this recipe. The flour's protein content can easily be seen on the packaging, and in this recipe, we recommend using a flour with a protein content of around 12 to 13% at least. More protein basically means more gluten, and that not only makes the dough stronger, but it also absorbs more water. If you use a lower protein flour instead, you could end up with an actual liquid-like mess. And that's probably not going to give you delicious and fluffy donuts, if you can even pick up the dough. The third thing we need to pay attention to is the Tangzhong. Super soft donuts are aided by the gelatinized starch mixture, and to properly make it, you need to make sure the water is as hot as it can be when you mix the flour into it. The flour needs to be heated to at least 65 degrees Celsius, so we need to mix fast too. After that, while it can be used right away, we like to rest it in the fridge overnight to help maximize the benefits we get from it. On to the next point, number 4, we are salt stressing the yeast. You might think, why and how do we do this? Well, the reason is because this dough has a fair amount of sugar, and while yeast can eat sugar, they don't do that well when they're surrounded by enough of it to basically smother them. This osmotic stress can really slow down fermentation and the yeast's ability to produce gas. And unless you're cool with waiting for a good long while, it's better to prepare the yeast for the dough by stressing them out with salt in advance. It's a super simple process and it takes just 2 steps. First, we'll activate the yeast in some milk with a little flour and sugar. Then we add a salt solution of salt, water, and milk. Cover and leave the entire mixture for 20 to 40 minutes. And we're done salt stressing the yeast. Now they've stocked up on plenty of trehalose and glycerol, which will let them thrive in our dough. So we don't have to wait for so long for the dough to ferment and get perfectly fluffy donuts. The last tip we've got is to make sure to pay attention to the proofing time. Here you can see 2 donuts, one with a white band around the center and the other without. The white band indicates that the donut was buoyant enough to float, preventing the center line from being submerged in the frying oil, whereas the other one was a little bit overproofed, and so it sank more, resulting in no white band. The taste is pretty much the same, but the fluffiness of the overproofed donut is a little worse than its properly proofed counterpart, so make sure to keep an eye on proofing time. And those are all the things you need to know for now, so let's get straight into the recipe. We're making the Tangzhong first here, so we have a bowl on top of the scale, and we're pouring in 90 grams of boiling water, measuring it out, and then immediately adding in 60 grams of flour. We move the bowl away and mix everything together with a spatula. The goal is to get most of the flour gelatinized before the water cools down too much. The water to flour ratio is higher than 1-to-1, so this isn't too difficult. We just need to give the entire mixture a few good turns and really mix that flour in. The biggest benefit of using Tangzhong in these donuts is that it not only helps keep them softer for longer, but that it also makes them a little sweeter thanks to the damaged and gelatinized starch getting broken down by enzymes in the dough later. To maximize these benefits, when we're done making the Tangzhong, we're going to clean up the bowl, put aside the spatula, cover it with a cloth, and then we're letting the Tangzhong cool to room temperature first before putting it in the fridge overnight. Then around an hour before we make our final dough, we have one more thing to do. We're going to salt stress our yeast. We have 6 grams of milk in a small bowl, and we're adding to it all of our yeast, 2.4 grams or about half of a teaspoon of instant yeast. Then we add in about 1/8 of a teaspoon of flour and the same amount of sugar. Combining everything with a spatula, using a little bit of force to break up the clumps of yeast and flour. There isn't a lot of liquid, which is why it's clumping like this. We'll just mash the lumps for about a minute or two, and they should eventually dissolve. If it sticks to the spatula, we can use a chopstick to help scrape it off, and then continue mixing. When it's become this smooth and homogeneous mixture, we're going to clean off the spatula, cover the bowl, and leave it for 5 minutes to activate the yeast. Here it is after 5 minutes, and before we open it up, we're going to prepare the salt solution for the mixture. We have 45 grams of milk in the small glass, and to it we directly add 25 grams of water, and then all of the salt, which is 5 grams, brushing it in from the plate. We're going to stir with a spoon to dissolve the salt now until it's been well mixed into all the liquid. Then we'll uncover the yeast mixture. It's already very fluffy after only 5 minutes with only a pinch of flour and sugar. It's a real testament to how quickly instant yeast works. Right after that, we're adding the salt solution in and mixing it in with a spatula. We don't need to get everything perfectly mixed. We're just trying to break down the bigger clumps of the yeast mixture. This shouldn't take a long time. We simply keep mixing for a bit, and then we'll clean off the spatula before covering the bowl and leaving it for 40 minutes. You could leave it for just 20 if you'd like to speed up the recipe, but the effects might not be as good as if you had left the mixture to rest for longer. Okay, when this yeast has been salt stressed, we'll take our Tangzhong out of the fridge and prepare the mise en place for our dough. And now let's finally make it. Taking our Tangzhong first, and it was so slippery here, I nearly dropped it a few times. Anyways, we're adding all of it in, scraping it in from the bowl. And immediately after that, we pour in our yeast salt mixture, just tipping it all in. Next, 1 whole egg. It should be around 50 grams without the shell. 45 grams of sugar, shaking it into the bowl. Around 0.3 grams of nutmeg, or a little less than 1/4 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. You can use more or less to your own taste. Finally, for now, we add 240 grams of bread flour, tapping it in. We'll then use the spatula to roughly combine everything, only really trying to get most of the flour hydrated. We still have 20 grams of butter that we haven't added, and we're going to develop the dough's gluten a little bit before we add it. We are leaving it out to soften before that. So for now, we continue mixing the dough, really mashing everything together. You can see the concentration I have. It's a pretty decent arm workout. When the dough gets to this point and it's too dense to mix with a spatula, we're going to clean off the spatula with a scraper, getting both sides clean of any dough, and then we're going to knead the dough in the bowl. Getting all of that loose flour incorporated, this should only take a few rounds. And after that, we're going to take the dough out of the bowl with our scraper and continue kneading it on the work surface. The same thing as before, but now that it's out of the bowl, it's a lot easier to stretch and maneuver. It's going to be very sticky at the beginning, and we want to knead it for about 5 to 6 minutes, using the scraper to clean up whenever needed. By the end of the kneading, the dough will still be sticky, but it'll hold together a lot better, and we're going to roughly shape it like this with the help of the scraper. Before covering it with a bowl, and leaving it to rest for about 15 minutes. This will help us develop gluten in the dough without us having to do anything, a very useful strategy for when you are hand kneading the dough. After 15 minutes, we're back to working on the dough. You can see it's a lot smoother now, and it's also a little less sticky. We're now going to add the butter in. So we first spread the dough out wider, using our hands to stretch and press it out a little bit. Then we want to slather the butter into the middle, getting it all off the plate and onto the dough. We can then fold it into the dough. This little step helps the butter get mixed into the dough, but it won't stop the dough from falling apart. That's just what happens when you mix butter into this dough, especially if you're doing this by hand like I am. It's a total mess. You just need to push through with the dough, keep forcefully kneading it. Before long, you'll see it getting better and better, and you can use a scraper to clean up any of the butter or dough on the surface. We simply keep going on and on until the dough looks to have absorbed all of the butter. And from that point, we want to knead for another 6 to 7 minutes or until the dough reaches full gluten development and passes the window pane test. Again, the dough is still sticky, but when it's well kneaded, it'll also be very strong. You can see here that the dough lifts up from the surface very easily. We'll clean up the dough with a scraper. And then we can take a small piece of the dough to do a quick window pane test. If the dough breaks apart before we can get it thin enough to see light through it, then it probably needs a few more minutes of kneading to fully develop the gluten. But if you can see light through it and the dough stretches nicely into a thin layer, then it's good to continue. So we'll do a few slap and folds to shape it into a more compact shape, using the scraper to clean up the sides. Then we'll pull in a new glass bowl, and we want to oil both the bowl and our hands so the dough doesn't stick. We then shape the dough into a little more of a round dough ball, just in our hands. When it looks smooth like this, then it's good, and we put it in the bowl. We'll cover it, and now it's bulk fermentation time. We're leaving the dough until it roughly doubles in size. When it's done, it should look like this. So we're going to take off the cover, and we're going to dust the work surface first with some flour, and then the top of our dough to prevent sticking. It's a pretty wet dough, so we're using quite a bit of flour. We'll continue by punching down the dough, fully degassing it. And then we take it out of the bowl, scraping out any stuck bits, and we're kneading it for a few rounds just to shape it into a boule. Now we're going to divide and pre-shape it into 12 small dough balls. We weigh the whole thing first to get a number, before dividing the dough straight away into 12. Splitting into 4 first, and then dividing each of those pieces into 3, using the scale to make sure all of the pieces are equal, and flour to dust as needed. We can then pre-shape them by rounding the pieces into little dough balls, just taking a piece, tucking in the edges into the center, tightening up the dough, and then rolling it in our palms to make it more spherical. Don't do this too tightly, it should just look smooth and a little taut. This is only pre-shaping after all. When they're all done, we cover them and let them rest for about 15 minutes, a quick bench rest, and once the time's up, we can come back and uncover the dough. We'll start shaping them by taking one, dusting it with flour, and then flattening it with our palm, adding flour as needed. We then roll it out into a wider circle with our rolling pin, not that much wider, about the size of a palm. To make the little dimple in the center, we then use this honey dipper to press down the center. You could also just use a similar round object or just your finger. Then we'll make the flower shape by making 5 cuts with our scraper like this. These are going to be the petals of our flower donuts. And to get the petal shape, we pinch together the ends. It looks sharp here, but during proofing and the frying, it'll puff up, giving us a much more rounded edge. And we're done shaping this one. We move it onto a piece of parchment paper already cut into a square. This will help us move it around without disturbing the shape too much and prevent it from sticking anywhere. We let it rest on the tray and continue with the rest of the dough pieces. We still have 11 more to go after all. It's all just the same steps as before. It's always so satisfying to see how the shape comes together though. Such a simple shaping method, but it's such a pretty result. One thing to pay attention to is that it's important to make sure you degas the dough well during the shaping process so that we get a uniform crumb with small bubbles throughout. When we're done shaping them all, we'll cover them with a cloth, and we want to let them proof until they've almost doubled. Make sure to be careful with proofing because it really plays a large part in determining the fluffiness of the donuts, as we mentioned before. About 15 minutes before the dough is done proofing, we're heating the frying oil to 170 degrees Celsius. We have an infrared thermometer for this, which is a tool we highly recommend for its convenience, but you could also test the oil by throwing in scrap pieces of dough. When the oil temperature has hit around 170 degrees Celsius and the dough is done, we're finally going to fry them. Being super careful with the hot oil, we want to drop in the dough one by one, putting away the parchment paper. We want to fry the donuts for around 50 seconds to 1 minute on each side until it reaches a golden brown color. We're frying 3 at once because we don't want to overcrowd the pan. Doing that can cause the oil temperature to drop and cause more problems, so we add the donuts in batch by batch. Once the donuts are golden brown on both sides and the oil isn't bubbling as much as it was at the start, then they're done frying and we're going to fish them out of the oil, putting them on the wire rack to cool down. And then we continue with frying the rest of the donut. Always making sure to keep an eye on the temperature, and you can see how cute these donuts look. They look like flowers floating in a pan, so nice. When they're all done frying, we're done. To top them, we're simply sprinkling on some powdered sugar generously, and then filling the dimple at the center with a little bit of strawberry jam. We also did some with blueberry jam instead. They look so good and they were absolutely delicious, and the little dot of strawberry jam really complemented the flavor. Here's the crumb. The center is pretty much hollow because we pressed it down. The thin dough at that part likely inflated, causing that big bubble. The donuts spring back when squished, a great sign of a fluffy donut, and they were soft and light in texture. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and bye!